Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I hope this will be an evening also for some of you, depending on from where you are joining us today. So welcome to this ATX webinar support for September 2025 exams. I am Richa and I work as Education Support Manager at ACCA. Our session today, Examiner's Report Unlocked, it is going to provide you an in-depth exploration of the latest March-June 2025 Examiner's Report, and we will also be uncovering some strategies to boost your performance. Aileen Edgar, she has joined us today to deliver this session and will help us explore common pitfalls and will also share some technical points with examples to help you prepare for your exams successfully. So during this session, Aileen is also going to guide you how to effectively use available exam practice resources, especially marking guides, sample answers, and how to present your exam responses clearly and confidently. So we will also cover some live questions as well coming in from you in Q&A box. So before I hand over to Aileen, I would like to briefly run through a few quick housekeeping items for you. At the bottom of your screen, you will find there is a help icon that is a quick access to resources and information which can assist you with any technical issues during the session. You make sure that the slide and media player icons both are selected, as you will need to view both of them throughout the webinar. Use attendee chat function, which I can see you are already doing that, but please be mindful, please put your questions in Q&A box only, and attendee chat, you can engage with your fellow participants, you can respond if anything Aileen is trying to talk to you in during the webinar, but please also do avoid sharing any personal information of yourself on the chat. Look for the icon that resembles like a file there. So clicking on that, you will get an access to helpful materials related to today's webinar, including direct links. Feel free to move things around on your screen and resize the windows however you like. And if you ever cannot hear us or the visuals disappear, just try refreshing your browser. By registering for this session, you will get an email tomorrow with all the details on how to watch it again. So don't worry, if you miss anything or you run into technical issues, you will be able to watch the recording later. I'm going to hand over to Aileen in a moment and we'll be back with you towards the end of the session. If you want to ask ACCA a question, or please do post them in Q&A box, as I said. So just a quick note, we may not be able to respond to everyone directly or individually via web chat, but please do, we will do our best to share the questions and answers that are helpful to everyone. So handing over to you, Aileen.
Thank you very much, Risha. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining live. Hello, if you're watching the recording later on. So just a quick bit about myself, first of all, just before we get cracking. I'm really glad lots of you are able to be here live. We're going to go through the most recent examiner's report from the June sitting. We're going to pull out some of the key learning from that so that you can use it to help you pass the September exam. So I am indeed Aileen Edgar. I've been a tax tutor since 2008. I've previously worked for both ACCA and for ICAS. I now run my own tax teaching, content expert business. I provide teaching, marking, tuition content, syllabus development, exam creation, lots of things to most of the professional accounting bodies in the UK, as well as some learning providers and universities. So I have supported thousands of students through their studies over the years. Today, I am going to be using that knowledge and experience to help you prepare for your September ATX exam. Now, in this session today, you should be able to see on the screen here that we have a little agenda for you. So we're going to be running through the most recent examiner's report, looking at how you can avoid some of the common mistakes that the exam team saw at that sitting. I'm going to run through some of the highlights from the examiner's report first of all. Then we're going to have a look at some practical ways that you can use the available exam practice resources and also some of my best tips on how to present your exam answers effectively. The ATX syllabus changed in June, so September will be the second sitting for us of it. You might be coming to this exam from studying under a previous syllabus, so I'm going to share some things to watch out for when preparing for the September sitting. And then I'm going to give you some of my top tips for avoiding some of the common mistakes that we see come up in these examiners' reports, so you can avoid them in your exam in September. And then we'll have time for your questions at the end. Now, please don't feel that you need to wait until the very end of the session to ask your question. You can just pop your question into the Q&A box for me, please, and I'll pick those up at the end. But as we're going through the session, if anything comes to your mind that you want to ask me and get an answer to, please put it in the Q&A box. As Risha said, the chat box is great for other general things, and I will be asking you a few wee things as we go along through the session that you can pop in the chat box. But if you want a question answered at the end, please put it in the specific Q&A box there. Okay, so I'm going to go over the most recent examiner's report for you here. There's a lot more detail in here, so I recommend after this session, if you haven't already, please make sure you go and read the detail, making your own notes, highlight areas that you could improve on before the September exam. I'd also recommend that you go further back, read the last 2 or 3 more reports, because that way you're going to start spotting patterns in where students can go wrong in the exam. You'll also see a variety of different topics, ideas, and styles of question being discussed by the examiner. Where possible, you should be reviewing the examiner's report alongside the past paper questions and marking guide on the practice platform. I'm going to show you later on how to access that, so we'll help you out with that. So let's get cracking into the examiner's report then. I'm just going to pause for a little second. I just want to make sure that I'm seeing what you're seeing, which I'm not at the moment. So let me just give me a second to fix that. I just want to make sure. Sorry, just bear with me a little second. Okay. Okay, I think I've got it. Thank you. Okay, so now some of the general tips and advice that we've got in the examiner's report are to ensure that you make sure you have covered the full syllabus. No, sorry, give me a second. I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to ask for some help, please, Risha or Michelle. I can't get the actual screen on for going through the animations. I'm just not sure it's actually working. Is that working now with the bullet points coming on?
Yes, it's coming down now.
Perfect, that's great, thank you. Sorry everybody, I just didn't quite have the right thing on my screen there. I've got it now, I think. So yeah, so some of the general tips and advice from this examiner's report. Make sure you've covered the full ATX syllabus. So brought forward knowledge from TX syllabus is really, really important that you have a good solid foundation from those previous tax studies, because all of that is examinable as well. How many of you have felt a wee bit overwhelmed by the size of the ATX syllabus? Worried maybe about how on earth you're ever going to remember all the rules, all the reliefs? Give me a yes in the chat box or a thumbs up if you've felt like that while you've been kind of studying this syllabus for the ATX exam. Well, a great way to learn is to practice the exam past paper questions. So make sure you've got the updated version. So the ACCA Study Hub, it's a brilliant resource for that. Spend as much time reviewing your attempt at the questions as you've done actually answering the questions. You need to be understanding how to read quickly, effectively, and practice being able to type quickly and efficiently as well. You need to go back and look at the scenario again in more detail if you find that you missed something in your answer. Make use of the blank workspace on the ACC practice platform to form your answers, and this helps you get used to the functionality that you'll have access to in the exam itself. Now, in the June report, we see the examiner discuss how important it is that students actually read and answer the requirements presented to them accurately and in full. There's no marks, I'm afraid, for spending time writing about things that are technically true but are not related to the question that you asked. So you're just wasting time for no credit. If the requirement tells you to explain, that is what you need to do. Just stating briefly a rule is not going to get you many, if any, marks. So if I asked you to explain the tax implications of giving a vase to my cousin, if you were just to tell me that there might be some CGT and IHT to pay, then I wouldn't be much further forward with understanding anything, would I? You need to explain to me why CGT and IHT might be relevant and the amount of tax, if you can work it out, and when that tax might be due, what might happen if I don't pay it, and so on. There's no use in telling the client some vague information around tax rules. That client needs to know, for example, how much tax they might have to pay, when is it due, and if they don't pay it, what are the consequences? You couldn't just tell them that they'll have some tax to pay sometime next year. There's a danger your client is late paying the tax or doesn't pay enough, ends up being hit with penalties or interest payments, and you can imagine that they wouldn't be very happy about that. So make sure you are actually answering the question that has been asked of you. You need that detail to lift your answer from being merely stating to explaining. A great tip from the examiner on this as well is to use the number of marks for the requirement to gauge how much you should be writing. It's not that there's a certain number of words that gets you half a mark or a mark, but if a requirement is worth 4 marks and you only write one short sentence, it's really unlikely you're walking away from that with 4 of the marks. But also you need to be careful that you don't go too far the other way and end up writing a whole page for something that's worth 4 marks. Again, it's unlikely you're writing a good answer there because the examiner knows how much you should be able to write in order to get those 4 marks. If you find yourself writing a whole page, you've probably misunderstood what you've been asked to do. You need to spot where you're overrunning, look back at the requirement and the scenario again, and check you haven't misunderstood what you've been asked to do. 2.25 minutes per technical mark is what we would recommend you use, as that gives you a little bit of a buffer. The examiner in the June examiner's report goes on to explain you need to be as precise as possible, which is kind of linked to that last point. In the ATX exam, you can actually be quite blunt in your answers. Now, this might be different to how you got used to writing your answers for other papers, or maybe how you were told to approach other exams you've done. It can be quite a different style of writing compared to university exams in particular. Even in question 1 in the ATX exam, where we've got communication marks up for grabs, we really don't need to see this beautiful and lengthy introduction to the question where effectively you're just repeating what you've been asked to do. You can just get right to the point. Do remember though, a letter, report, memo, email style header needs to go at the start of question 1, depending on what you're being asked to do. Similarly, at the end of the whole answer to a question, you really don't need to waste any time summarizing what you've said above. The only time where there's going to be marks for that is where you've been asked to give a recommendation or advise on a course of action after exploring it. So think short, snappy sentences. Those are the way to go with ATX. Remember, your client is paying for your time. They do not want that money being wasted. Please make sure if the question only asks you to calculate, that you waste 0 time giving any kind of explanations at all. There's not going to be marks for it. It is a total waste of your time. Now, the next point that the examiner makes in this June examiner's report is to think and plan. Now, be honest, how many of you think you do any planning before you write up your answers in an exam or when you've been practicing your questions? What do you think planning actually means? Please do share some ideas in the chat box of what we might mean as good planning or things that you've developed that you think are good planning tips. It can be really obvious for a marker when you're marking exams. somebody's not done much, if any, planning because they waffle, they contradict themselves, they repeat themselves, they don't use headings or sensible paragraphs, their numbers are all over the place, they waste time writing out things where when there's actually shortcuts they could have taken. And I know it can feel really counterintuitive in the exam, but I promise you, if you spend more time planning at the start of each requirement, you will write a better answer and that will translate into better marks. Now, the last of the main suggestions for improvement that came from the examiner in this most recent examiner's report was that students need to be showing their markings, sorry, not their markings, their workings. Now, the marker can see inside the cells of your spreadsheet, so they can see your workings in there. But what I would say is that at advanced tax, we don't really tend to use big formula. And instead, what we're doing when we're doing our calculations is we're working through a series of step-by-step processes. So it's much easier for your marker if you're showing each line of that process for them, rather than trying to cleverly string together a big long series of additions, subtractions, multiplications, and so on in one cell in the spreadsheet. Because if you make a mistake with any part of that, it's really difficult for the marker to figure out where you went wrong and give you as much credit as they can. So definitely don't just work things all out on your calculator and put the final number on the screen. There's more often than not, there's marks for the actual process as opposed to the final number that you might end up with. Okay, so what about if you're a resitter? Because the last of the main suggestions for improvement that the examiner made was specifically for resitters. So they were looking at things like spend some time, and I know we had a question in the Q&A box already about this, so this might answer your question. With the time you've got between now and the exam, if you're a resitter, you've been through the whole syllabus already, and before, what do you do with the time that you've got available? You need to be really honest with yourself. Okay, there's no point hiding behind things. It was an unfair paper or whatever circumstances. You need to be honest with yourself. What can you do differently now? So identify weak areas. Think back to your exam. Did you actively avoid any topics when preparing for the exam? Now's the time to confront them. You cannot question spot for this exam. Practice papers. Think about how much you put yourself under exam-like conditions and how often did you put your notes away out of reach and just set a timer and pushed yourself before that exam. And these kind of tips actually apply to people who are doing it for the first time as well, not just resitters. You've got 3 weeks left now. You can make a really big difference to your chances of success at this exam. But you need to be honest and look at how you're approaching things. Think about your time management if you're a resitter. Did you run out of time in the exam? Which question did you start with? Do you think that was a good idea for you? Poor time management can really be the undoing of even the most prepared students. So you really need to think about what are you going to do differently this time and actually practice it beforehand. The key is actually practicing so you get better at this. Okay. So we're going to look at some of the questions that came up in the June examiner report so that we can see how to apply some of these tips from the exam team. So we've got a question here you can see on the screen was for 4 marks, and students were being asked to explain why the client could become a UK tax resident on the 1st of November. Even without reading the scenario, because I've not put the actual background detail on there, even without reading the scenario, 4 marks on residence rules tells me that there's no way they can expect me to be going through all of the non-UK residence tests, all of the UK residence tests and the sufficient ties tests. That's way too much for 4 marks. So how can you get to the point where you know that? Because I know that. I know that looking at that question. There's no way I can be being asked to do all of that stuff. So how can you get to that point where you feel confident and you can use those marks to guide you as to how much to write? by doing past paper questions. And when you're doing them, it's not about just rattling through as many as you can get through. It's about being really mindful when you're reviewing your answers. So compare your answers to the model answers and the marking guide and really spot and then go back to the scenario and requirement and just see if you've missed something. Why did you go away off on a tangent when, the model answer stopped at a certain point? Chances are, in this ATX exam, you've missed something. You have missed something, a sentence, a word, some sort of bit, either in the requirement itself or in the wider scenario. There are instructions and steers and guides in there, but you've just maybe rushed through it. So getting into the extra detail of this particular requirement, you can see that there's some guidance to help you narrow down your answer and make it really specific to this particular client. So we're told that our client, Chloe, doesn't satisfy any of the automatic non-UK residence tests. So what is that telling you? It is telling you, the student in the exam, looking at this, not to bother wasting your time discussing them. There will not be marks for telling your boss or your client something they already know. They would be really unhappy, actually, at you. The client is not wanting to pay you money for that advice, are they? So go in with that mindset. Now, we're told that Chloe also does not satisfy the automatic UK residence tests in relation to her only home being in the UK. And I'm saying that slowly and carefully for a very good reason, because actually in the exam, a lot of students paid no attention to that last bit of it. They just saw Chloe does not satisfy the automatic UK resident test and they just moved on. And they wasted a ton of time talking about the sufficient ties tests when actually she actually did satisfy one of the automatic UK residence tests, just not the one about the home being in the UK. So the hints and the guidance is there. But what students do in the exam, when you've got that pressure, you've got the time pressure, students look for what is the topic. I always say this to my students. It's like, you look for the topic of a requirement. I look for the how, the what, the what have I to miss out? How should I structure my answer? I look for the clues. The answer to the actual technical topic will come when I start to actually write my answer, as long as I know that area. But what's going to help me pass the exam more is the exam technique, in terms of I need to make sure I do exactly what I've been asked to do and nothing more, because if I do any more than that, I'm wasting my time. Okay, so you can see there I've highlighted on this screen what students focused on, which was explain why she'll become UK tax resident. So they just started battering through the sort of all the rules that they could think of without paying attention to what was actually there in front of them, which was that she didn't satisfy the automatic non-UK ones and she didn't satisfy one of the automatic UK tests, but she might have qualified for some of the others. Okay, so please spend time over the next few weeks looking at questions this way with a set of fresh eyes, not worrying about the topics, worry about the how. How are they giving you clues in there? Okay, so hopefully you can see that from that example on the screen, and maybe just getting you to start thinking about how you approach questions, and maybe if you've done something like that. So this is a little, on the screen now, we've got a little excerpt from the examiner's report. Just bringing up the fact students missed that point regarding the test being in relation to our only home in the UK, so they then bashed on and talked about the sufficient ties test. So the examiner is emphasising here students really need to go back and reread the requirements during your answer. So don't just read them once, write your answer and then move on. Keep looking back at the requirement so you can spot things that maybe you have missed on that first read over. Okay, so look for clues in the scenario or the requirement. They will be there. The examiner really does not want you just to be dumping down everything you know about a subject. Okay, they will give you direction and clues. In another part of the examiner's report, they give a really great breakdown about planning and how planning could have been done better. So this was to do with this part of the question where they were being asked to calculate the financial cost of each of the benefits for a complete tax year and come to some sort of conclusion on their findings. The examiner explains that this was best done by spending some time planning, coming up with a sensible step-by-step approach. So breaking something that initially feels a bit overwhelming into small logical steps. So first they were to calculate the taxable benefits of the cars, then work out the taxable benefit of the house. Doesn't really matter which way round you would have done that in this particular example. And then thinking about doing two full income tax computations. Um, we do talk a lot at ATX about working at the margin, which is like taking shortcuts, not doing full computations to make comparisons. But there's certain circumstances where working at the margin, just looking at what's changed between option two versus option one, doesn't work. And this is an example of where it doesn't work. You would have got yourself into a bit of a muddle with this question. And it's to do with where people's income is quite close to that 100,000 threshold where their personal allowance might get scaled back. And that's what happened in this particular question. So that's why in this particular question, if you have a look at the examiner's report after this session, you'll see the actual question. You can see why actually doing two full computations, but that's reflected in the number of marks available. If the examiner expects you to be taking shortcuts, there won't be as many marks available. If they expect you to be doing two full computations, there will be marks available for doing that. They give this lovely step-by-step approach to it. It's really great, and I strongly recommend you go and have a look at this particular question after the session. The more question practice you do, the better you get at thinking ahead and planning roughly how you're going to approach your answer, because you will have seen lots of different ways of answering questions and you'll have picked up some tips of those along the way. Now, we are going to look at the new ACCA practice platform and how you can assign past papers to yourself. So you'll be able to go on and find the June past paper, which goes along with this June examiner's report. So you can go in and look at the question, have a go at it yourself, and then you can go to the examiner's report and get this lovely kind of exam technique help with it. So that's what I want you to be putting on your study plan for this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few slides. Please don't worry about jotting down loads of notes from this. Because those of you who are on live, you will be able to get a recording of this afterwards, and you can kind of stop and kind of sit and walk along with me on your own computer. So please don't stress about trying to follow what I'm doing on the next few slides. You can watch it on recording and pause and follow me along there. But what I'm going to do is show you how to get a past paper assigned to you and go in, and what then we're going to do is talk about how we can use the marking guidance solution to help you do some self-marking, because it's great if you've got access to a tutor who can help you and give you feedback, but if you don't, or for whatever particular question you're doing, you're self-marking it, then we're going to give you some help on how to do that. So first of all, let's see, how do we actually get a paper assigned to us within the system? So here you can see on the screen, we've got the practice platform, and we're just going to look at where we go. So once you've logged in, you'll log in via your My ACCA login. You'll be able to see this screen here. And what you can do is you can click on Browse Available Exams. Now, you're going to have to pick the right subject because it'll have a drop down of all the subjects. So we, of course, are going to choose ATX. Then we're going to look at the correct variant. So this webinar today is aimed around the UK variant, but most of what we're talking about today is equally as applicable to the other variants as well. So you would just pick the right variant for the exam that you're doing. So we're going to pick the UK for this example. And then we're going to pick past exam, because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the June 2025 exam. So you've got this drop down box here. This is how you can also access that blank workspace to do some practicing as well for your exam. But we're going to pick past exam. And then we've got a lovely number of options to pick. We want the June 2025 one. Notice that there's a reference there to the 25-26 syllabus. So just so you know, that's a reference to the exam year. So June 2025 through to March 2026. It's not a reference to the Finance Act that's being examined. For the September 2025 exam, you're being examined on Finance Act 2024. So the only past paper there that's on the current Finance Act at the moment is that June 2025 one. Anything else that's on there is from a previous Finance Act. I just know sometimes students get a wee bit confused regarding the years against the past papers, so I just wanted to clarify that while we were going past that part. Then we click Assign. And you can then go into View Assignments and navigate to, there's a little tab there called Self-Assigned. So that's where you have assigned a past paper or a specimen paper or practice paper to yourself. It's going to appear in a list below. Then you'll hit Start, you'll work your way through the questions, you'll answer them while ideally keeping an eye on how long you're taking. You want to give yourself 90 minutes for question 1, 45 for each of question 2 and 3, plus of course extra time if you get extra time in the real exam. That will give you a buffer of 15 minutes as well at the start or the end or throughout your exam. Now, once you've done your answers, you're going to hit to end the exam. You're going to confirm you're happy to do that. And the good news here is you are going to be really so much more easily able to find where your answers have gone than in the old practice platform. So it's really, really easy. They're just going to be sitting on the same page as where you started the exam, except now it'll say mark exam instead. So it's really easy to find. You confirm that you're happy to start self-marking, and then you'll be into where the answers and the marking guide document is. And there's a document, you can scroll up and down that document. It contains all the answers and marking guides for all 3 questions together in one document. Okay, so that was a bit of as I say, I didn't expect you to be taking notes there. Please do watch the recording, or if you've been watching the recording, go back and rewind it and press pause, and just if you need any help navigating to find it. What we're going to spend a bit of time on now is looking at a couple of those examples. We're going to be looking at the model answer, the marking guide, so parts of this document that you're going to find once you hit self-mark, and some of my tips on how to use that to help you when you're doing your own self-marking. Okay, so if we just look at the first page here, you can see this is a suggested solution for question 1, part A, which happens to be that 5-mark requirement from ethics. So remember, you'll have 5 ethics marks in question 1 in your exam. That is on the box on the right-hand side of the screen there. On the left, that's the actual requirement itself. Now at the bottom is the breakdown of the marks. So what I want to do is spend a wee bit of time on showing you how you can use the suggested solution and the marking guide to compare your answer and figure out how many marks you think you would get for the answer, how to identify gaps in your knowledge, where your exam technique needs some work. So ethics is always going to be a 5-mark requirement. You can see here in the marking guide under the available column that there were actually 6 possible things that could have got a mark in the answer, but it'll be kept at a maximum of 5. The breakdown of those 6 marks is 2 can be given for explaining the meaning of the principles outlined in the question, then 2.5 for giving detail on potential threats and safeguards for objectivity, and 1.5 marks for the same thing for confidentiality, because those were the 2 ethics competencies that were relevant to this answer. So you can look at the answer on the right-hand side. Do you see that they've used headings? I personally love headings in answers. I use them when I'm planning how to write my answer before I begin, because you're more likely to hit the marks that are in the marking guide if you're breaking requirements down into little subtasks. So let's look at the requirement. It asks us to set out behaviour required of ACCA members to comply with objectivity and confidentiality. So they've told us the 2 competencies to look at. Look at the answer. We've got a heading called objectivity, where they explain the behaviour. And then they do the same under the heading called confidentiality. They've taken that first bullet point in the question, they've pulled it apart into 2 elements that need to be addressed, objectivity, confidentiality. Now, you don't need to have set your answer out exactly like this to get the marks. The marker will search through everything you've written. And this is the type of thing that they're looking for in order to give you those 2 marks for the meaning of the principles. But by taking a minute or two at the start of the requirement to use the information in the requirement there and pull it apart, you're going to have a much better structure to your answer, and you're going to create something faster and more likely to hit the marks on the guide. The second line of the marking guide, 2.5 marks for objectivity. For that, they're meaning the second bullet point of the requirement. They always follow the order of the requirement and tasks when they're setting out the marking guide. So that should help you as well, be able to kind of go back to the requirement and just figure out where those marks are. That second bullet point asked us to set out potential threats to the principles and also safeguards to put in place. Now, in the marking guide, they've got 2.5 marks for objectivity, 1.5 for confidentiality. You can see they've used the headings in the second part of their answer there. Me personally, I probably would have gone further in my answer, put in subheadings for threats, another subheading for safeguards, but as I say, I do love a heading. For an ethics question, usually we see 1 mark for each distinct point that's made. And here in the suggested solution, there are 4 points under objectivity, 2 under confidentiality. That rule doesn't quite tally up there, but if you look at the fact that the last point under each part there is about having separate teams responsible, well, it's really just a repetition of the same point, isn't it? So it's unlikely the marker is being told to give 1 mark for each of those points. So it's probably just a half mark there. The other points, I say, we're looking for 1 mark each for a well-developed point. Perhaps that second one under objectivity, getting a little bit more credit. We've had to think a little bit more about that one. Now, if you do have any questions about the ethics part of the exam, please do pop them into the Q&A box and I will pick those up later on. Remember earlier on we were looking at part of the June exam that was asking for calculations of different employment benefits. We're going to look at the suggested solution for that one quickly. Once again, you can see the marking guide has got headings. They align with ideally how you would set out your answer for this requirement, because you were asked to work out the financial cost of each of the 2 benefits, the cars, the accommodation. So you can see that they again have pulled that requirement apart and they've used those headings. So if you do the same when you're writing your answer and you take the number of marks and think, oh, okay, well, even if I just split it equally between the 2 and spent your time allocation then that way, you're more likely to be writing an answer that is going to be hitting the marks available, and you're less likely to overrun on your answer as well. So we'll look at the cars. First of all, 1.5 marks for getting to taxable income there. So I have put out what I think is the kind of breakdown of the marks, more than likely. There's sometimes with marking guides, there's different ways you can interpret them. But I think this is a reasonable, this is how I would mark it, certainly. And then they've done a nice summary table in the suggested solution. Again, you don't have to have done this in your answer, but somewhere you need to have addressed the fact the question asked you to, compare the 2 options and, come to some sort of conclusion about it. So doing little summary tables is quite nice. For your marker, makes it really easy for them to find the figures they're looking for, and it helps you spot if you've missed anything as well. The accommodation, 2.5 marks. So I've just kind of set out there what I think would be necessary. For calculations, mostly we're looking at half marks. Anywhere where you've had to do a little bit more work on things, think about, it's probably a mark, sometimes even a mark and a half. Where you've just had to lift a number from the question and put it in the right place in your answer, it's probably half a mark. If you've had to take that number and maybe restrict it in some way because of some tax rule that you're aware of, that's probably going to be worth more than that, maybe a mark then for that. Applying tax rates, even though, yes, you're multiplying one number by another number, it's probably only half a mark for applying the correct tax rates. applying personal allowance, half a mark, unless you've had to do a little bit of work, maybe restricting the personal allowance when it would be worth more. So that gives you a bit of a guide for the calculations and how to self-mark those. So the key things to remember are tends to be half marks for straightforward lifting of numbers, very easy multiplications, 1 mark if you've had to take a couple of steps to get to that number. There don't tend to be marks for the exact right final number. It's more about how you get to that number that matters. Also, please remember there's an own figure rule in the exam. Can anyone tell me in the chat box what do we mean by own figure? Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as OFR, or sometimes, excuse me, it's also called follow through marks or flow through marks. Let me know in the chat box if you've got an understanding of what that means. So own figure rule is something the markers have to follow when they're marking the exam. It's where you are penalised only once for a mistake. The marker then will sit, they'll look at your numbers you've done after the mistake, they're going to recalculate things to see if overall your approach was right, but you were just using the wrong number. They will give you the marks after that initial mistake. They will give you the marks after that if what you've done with that wrong number is correct. Yes, so it's really helpful to remember. Okay, so you can get something wrong and still actually pick up most of the marks in the answer. Okay, so never give up in this exam. There's lots of half marks everywhere. And even if you don't know what to do with something, you know, if you've spent more than a minute debating whether to add something or deduct something, it was probably worth half a mark. Just make a decision and move on. The marker will recalculate everything you've done after that. Okay, and you can pick up lots of marks after it. Okay, then we're going to turn our attention to syllabus changes for ATX. Probably aware that the syllabus runs from June through to March, different to other subjects. So it means that September sitting is going to have the same syllabus as the June sitting. So Finance Act 24 is the ruling legislation for your exam coming up. We do have a number of changes that have come through this year. I'm just going to leave those on the slide there for you so that you can, sorry, I'll go back to that. So you can look at those and come back to them later. You will find all this detail in the Finance Act article from the examiner. So you've got them on the slides there. I want to get onto the Q&A, so I'll leave you to have a look at those if you haven't already. Of course, if you're using the ACCA Study Hub or approved learning providers, you'll have access to all of that information anyway. There have been some changes across the ACCA qualification because of IFRS 18. That has a minimal amount of impact on us at ATX, and you students don't really need to worry about it. It's more to do with the wording of things in learning materials, so, and not very much at all, so don't worry about that. I want to just quickly show you the syllabus document. It's not something a lot of students will look at, but there are a couple of pages in it that are really useful to look at. Gives you a big picture of the ATX exam. It also has a little bit towards the end about some changes that maybe are not Finance Act changes. They're more to do with what ACCA has decided should be in or out of the syllabus. So if you're a resitter and you sat in a previous syllabus, or you know you sat TX under an old previous syllabus, then that's quite good to look at that bit there. And there's just some other nice wee bits in there that just give you a nice overview of the exam. So I strongly suggest you have a wee look at the syllabus document if you haven't looked at it before. And then, just before we move on to the Q&A, I just wanted to give you some of my top tips, because we've talked about exam technique and things. Reading things, we've talked about reading the requirements, really important, making sure you pay attention to verbs. We've talked about noticing the number of marks per requirement, helping you to structure your answer. Don't just look for what topic the question's on, look at the how am I going to answer, where are the hints and steers in there. In terms of planning, really important, make sure you spend some time planning, before writing your answer. You will write a better answer if you've done a good plan, if you've pulled that requirement apart and you've done some subheadings and you've thought about your mark allocation. You thought, well, I've got 5 marks, I've got 3 subheadings. So each thing I'm going to say is really only going to be 1 or 2 marks. So it can't be this huge, lengthy, complicated process. And also, another good thing about planning out your answers like that is that if you realize you've written 3 subheadings and you think, oh my goodness, I really don't know how to do that second one, I cannot remember the rule about company share option schemes. Well, do you know what? You've written 2 other subheadings. Answer those 2. If you just can't think of anything to say for the third one, you at least can look at that requirement, 5 marks, whatever it is, and think, well, I'm confident about the 2 parts that I answered. That third part, nah, just got nothing to give for that. But maybe I've got 3, maybe even 4 marks out of 5. That's pretty good, isn't it? Okay, so planning actually helps you to make sure you're picking up marks that you're able to get and not stressing about the ones that you just think, no, I've got nothing. I've got nothing there to give. Okay, so planning is really important. And I've also given you 5 top writing tips as well. So one of those is about tax tables. Because remember, you've got tax tables in the exam. They don't contain everything, but the number of students I see who do, for example, a national insurance contributions question and put the wrong rate down, and therefore they miss half a mark. Sometimes they miss half a mark for the employee one, half a mark for the employer one. You don't need to memorize those numbers. They're in the tax tables in the exam. Okay, they're normally down bottom left-hand corner where it says help. You can click on that and it shows tax tables. And don't commit that to memory. Take the time to look it up. Those could be the marks that make the difference between a pass and a fail. The numbers are there for you. So if you haven't been using your tax table so far to help you with your practice questions, you need to start doing it now from today onwards. Okay. And another one I really want to highlight on that 5 list there is the number 4 there, explain why. If you have got a question where it's asking you to explain, so it says the verb is explain, say why. Don't just jump to the conclusion. I think you should sell the asset in 2025. Tell me why. There are marks for it. ATX is all about the process, all about how do you get to that conclusion. Show us you know how. Yes, that's the right answer, but why? Tell us why. Okay, try and be blunt with it though, be succinct, but tell us why there are marks available for it. Because otherwise the marker goes, well, you might have just guessed. You had a 50-50 chance. You decided sell it next year, don't sell it this year. I can't give you 3 marks for that. I need to know that you understand why selling it in 2025 is the right answer, for example. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, but it's so important at ATX. Okay. All right then, so we have got to the Q&A session. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes on this. So thank you to those of you who have already popped some questions into the Q&A box. I am going to try and get through as many of them as I possibly can. Okay, so please bear with me as I go through them. Okay. So if you're a resetter, what should you be doing? Probably the same advice as I would say to anybody else, to be honest, first timer, resetter. At this stage, 3 weeks to go, question practice needs to be your main focus. You are going to learn so much more from looking at past paper questions, putting yourself under time pressure, doing that review of the marking guide and the model answer, comparing to yours, going back and rereading, rewriting questions that you've not done very well on, do them again once you have done some revision of that area. That is a much more effective use of your time now than going and just like rereading the whole of your notes again or the whole of the study hub again. You don't have time for that. The exam is an application exam. Yes, you have to have the knowledge, but you need to be able to apply it. How do you learn how to apply it? You have to do question practice. So that's what I would recommend for you. Okay. Really interesting question about the use of Chat GPT or any other kind of AI to help you with your studies. Is it a good way to go about things? Now, I know you'll think I'm biased because obviously I'm a tutor, And I'm going to say, don't use artificial intelligence to help you. I think it can be really useful at explaining concepts in a really nice way. Yes, it can. And if you've got a paid version of one of these things, then even better. But I check I don't use, I use Claude, but it doesn't matter. Whatever one you use, I every so often will go in and I'll ask a question because I'm curious to know how good it is. As yet, I do not believe it is good enough to give you an accurate answer. I know when it's wrong. You don't know when it's wrong because you're a student. I know because I'm an experienced tutor who knows all the rules, who knows all the rules behind the rules that you're not even examined on. So at the moment, I don't think it is good enough to support you. That's my personal view. So I think it can be good if you've been looking at a concept and you're like, what's a simple way to explain this to me in a way that makes sense to me? That might work. But is it giving you accurate? Not so sure. I wouldn't use it personally. Question practice, definitely. So using past paper questions, make sure they're updated to the current syllabus. Nothing's going to assure you a pass, but these are the types of things that will absolutely get you to be more likely to pass is covering the whole syllabus, practicing past paper questions. Um, what to focus on in the remaining days. Everything's examinable. You can't question spot, but the types of things that we do see come up, I'm not giving you specific tiny little bits of the syllabus here. These are big topics, but things like losses, loss relief, tax reliefs. ATX is an exam about seeing how you can help your client to be more effective with the way they plan things to save them money. So a big part of the exam is, do you know how to, within the rules, save your client money? So that is things like loss reliefs, it's capital gains tax reliefs. Can you help your client avoid making, I don't know, silly decisions, or a decision about doing something this year versus next year that could help again save them money? That's about understanding the rules and applying them. So things like overseas issues, that's a bigger component of the ATX syllabus than it was the TX syllabus. So, but that's across all taxes. But so loss reliefs, tax relief, so your CGT, your IHT reliefs, shares. Students don't like shares. They don't like anything to do with shares. So I would make sure that you address that. Look at things to do with shares. And it's not just in CGT, because sometimes we'll have things to do with shares, like share option schemes for employees that impact income tax. So make sure that you're looking at things. Don't hide away from topics that you don't like. Can we completely ignore pound symbols in the ATX exam? The only place where you could possibly get penalised for it is in question one. There's normally one communication mark that's to do with your sort of format and layout. Possibly a marker could decide, but it wouldn't be based on that one thing. They'd also look at, have you done a memo? Have you presented things in a way that is easy to follow? So I don't think it's a big issue. If it's to do with your keyboard, I know for a lot of people it's to do with their keyboard and it's really hard to find. You could just put GBP, Great British Pounds, or just write pounds at the top. It's fine. The marker understands the limitations that some people will have with that. Okay, so I think I've covered off what to do in the next 3 weeks in terms of practicing. Do you need to know by heart every single topic and its rules? Oh, in an ideal world, yes. But in the real world, people who work in tax go and look up books. They don't walk about with every single rule in their head. Okay, so the pass mark is not 100%, it's 50. You need to know enough about each area to be able to do a good enough job. And there's certain kind of areas that are bigger, like income tax is a much bigger, wider area with lots more bits of the syllabus in it. You want to make sure you spend a good amount of time on that. Same with corporation tax. But don't miss out on things like VAT. These can be some of the easier marks to get because it tends to be quite standalone topics. Order of questions, great question. I used to advise that most students found doing section B first easier than doing section A, but I would say from probably the December exam last year, section B has had some interesting little scenarios in it, which some people have found a little bit off-putting, and actually they reported that section A felt more comfortable for them. So my advice is, one, doing mocks and practice questions ahead of time. Practice it. Do section A first in one mock or one practice question under timed conditions. Then do it last. See what feels comfortable for you. But what I'd also say is if you allocate 2.25 minutes per mark, across the whole technical marks, you've got a little bit of buffer time. And what you could do is at the start of the exam, just have a look. What they do is on that front screen of each question, there'll be a bullet point list, which is a bit of an overview of the topics. Just go into question 1, question 2, question 3, look down it. If something strikes fear in your heart, some people like to just, hit that head on and do it first. Some people like to, move on to something more comfortable. So have a look. So you could use a little bit, couple of minutes at the beginning, just to look at that bullet point list and make a decision which one to start on. But you should be managing your time anyway in the exam so that you've got enough time to do everything anyway. Professional marks. How do we get professional marks? Great question. There's 20 available. 10 in question 1, 5 in question 2, 5 in question 3. Do not allocate any of your time in the exam towards professional marks. You cannot guess what they are. The markers will have them and they will mark based on what they are given. But if you answer the requirement in the way it has been asked, so if they tell you to explain with supporting calculations and you've done that, if they ask you to briefly do something or in detail do something, you will be picking up professional marks along the way. And the other thing I would say for ATX specifically that's probably different to other subjects is that there tends to be more professional marks for things like spotting tax reliefs. So things that they didn't tell you explicitly in the question. If you can spot those and you've applied them or you've stated that they don't apply, then there's quite often a professional mark tied in with that. Okay, we've done what order? Bullet points. Yeah. I wouldn't say, I don't like to say do bullet points because sometimes people then write 3 words per bullet point, which isn't really going to be enough to get the marks. What I do when I'm planning and when I'm writing my answers, I think in bullet points. I don't write in bullet points, but I think as if I'm writing a bullet point. So I write one sentence, one line, and a space, another line, because I've planned my answer. My plan is in bullet point form, and then, but it's very brief. It's like 1 word per bullet, or maybe a couple. But my actual answer is full proper sentences, but they're really blunt. So it's you could look at it as a bullet, but it's not presented that way. But I think in bullet point form because I don't want to waffle. But the planning really helps with that. But see if you're running out of time and you've got 10 minutes left at the end of the exam and you've still got a 8-mark requirement to do, you get what you need down at that point because every second counts at that stage. Right, I'm going to pick up one more question and then I'll hand back so we can finish up. Thank you so much for all the questions. They're brilliant. And I'm just trying to get through as many as I can. Okay, word processor and spreadsheet answer space. Ideally, question 1, start with the word processor, move on to the spreadsheet answer space for calculations. Make sure you're telling your marker where to go. You could, in theory, do all of your answer in the word processing answer space. It's a little table function. You could, in theory, do it all in the spreadsheet answer space. Question 1 is the only one that's got communication marks where you might drop down there. But ideally, working across the two, and question practice helps you practice getting faster at doing that. So if you're not already using the blank workspace, please do that. And I will hand back. Thank you very much to everybody else for asking questions. Sorry I didn't get to them all.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you so much. I can say you have actually covered quite many questions. questions because we had too many questions coming in in Q&A box. And so with this, we are just nearing to the time when we have to end this session. So I believe you all have really found this session very useful. But before we go, I would like to play a poll for you. That's a very quick poll. I won't take too much time in that, just to know that whether you are aware of mock and debriefs dates or not. So here is the question, that when is pre-September, what are the dates of pre-September 2025 mock and their debrief release? If you can push the answer button for me there on your screen, we will be really um okay. Looking forward. I have not yet started receiving any responses. Oh yes, now it is there. So just looking for more responses from you. This is not a very tough question. It can be if you don't know, but let it be. Even if you don't know, we are here to help you with this so that you are able to access the mock, you are able to access the debriefs, and you are able to prepare for your exam successfully. So just looking forward to few more entries. Okay, so with the countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, I am going forward to the results. So, whatever votes we have received, we got the results saying most of you are mentioning no. Okay, most of you don't have no idea. Oh, no problem at all. So to let you know, mocks are already live there, and the ones who have said 8th August and 15th August, that's the correct date. 15th August, this weekend, you will get the mock debriefs as well, released on ACCA Study Resources YouTube channel. And please do make use of it. Take the mock and watch the debrief and look into the kind of the gaps you may have in your understanding and exam delivery. I will also not forget to remind you of the most important resources which are available in the practice platform, which we have talked about in great detail in this session. You have seen that how the resources there, like marking guide, answers, can help you really build your confidence. There is Study Resources YouTube channel as well, with all the latest recordings, topic explainers, debriefs, which I am talking about right now, and other important tips which really keep on coming, and the recording of the webinars too. We have ACCA Study Hub also. Please do refer to all the material related to your exam, and do opt for the questions they are which are available there, quizzes and all. So with this, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here in this session. And don't forget to pick all the important resource links which are there in the resource section. And you will get a link tomorrow to to watch this session live again. Thank you to Aileen for your support, and special shout out to the team working behind the scene to help us make this session run smoothly. Wish you all the very best for your exams. Thank you.